Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us. We're excited to share our journey with you today. Want to introduce first the participants of today's discussion. First of all, we have Kate Emery, the founder of the Walker Group, here with us. Jenny Kassan, the founder of the Kassan Group, a law firm who specializes in working with mission-driven companies. I'm Jessica Rich, a very proud 21-year employee at the Walker Group and co-CEO. And then Todd Bailey, my partner, the other co-CEO here at the Walker Group. So first, just a couple of quick housekeeping items for our time today. We are recording the session to be able to share it later. We're going to ask everyone to remain muted since we do have a large group today. We do have the Q&A feature enabled in Microsoft Teams. So if you have questions, anything comes to mind, please post there. We have some of our folks moderating. If it's a quick answer, we'll be able to do it then. Otherwise, towards the end of the hour, we will be answering any questions that we can. And then lastly, in Microsoft Teams, we do recommend that you turn off the feature called IntelliFrame. It'll make mine and Kate's time here together look a little bit better for you. It's down in the bottom left corner of your screen where you might see your name, and click on the three dots and turn off IntelliFrame. It's just a suggestion, it's not critical. So let's dive right in here. So since the Walker Group's transition to being a Perpetual Purpose Trust company last year, we have been really humbled and just really in awe of the excitement and the admiration and the curiosity from our friends, our clients, our partners, and the community in general. So because of that curiosity, we're here today to try to have this conversation. And our intent for the time today is to explain how we got here, how does the model work, and what does it mean to everyone in our ecosystem. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our fearless founder, Kate Emery, to set the stage with just giving us a little history on the PPT structure and how it came to the Walker.
Sure. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. So I've been thinking about the why and how we got started, and I think it goes way back to my beginnings and the beginning of what is now the Walker Group. Back in, 1983, I started Balanced Computer Support, and that was supposed to be balancing high tech and human touch. I think I've always sort of straddled two different worlds. I've got a father who was an engineer, scientist. My mom was a social worker. So there's the head and the heart. And both of them were very, very committed and involved in the communities around them. So when I got my undergraduate in management and my graduate degree in IT, and so I was thinking of starting my own company. My dad thought I was nuts. My mom said, go for it, which she said to anything I wanted to do. But I also said, well, what am I doing to give back? Because they did a lot of things to give back to the community. And Mom said, you'll figure it out. Something will present itself. And so with that in mind, I started Balanced Computer Support. And really, for me, which I think is the case with many, many founders, it started off as just being sort of a fun challenge. So I enjoyed building the company. I enjoyed sort of trying to figure out what we were going to be when we grew up, kind of a thing. And so it started as just something fun. And then I think what flipped a switch for me was reading Divine Right of Capital, Marjorie Kelly, awesome book. And she's just written another one, which I haven't read yet, but need to. And in that book, what it did was open my eyes to the fact that any of us who have been to business school or grew up in our economy, I guess, there's this presumption that business should be all about and is only about the money. And really, that's just a mythology that we've put into our head and then grown up believing. And what it opened my eyes up to was the fact that it doesn't have to be that way. So that is what sort of started me thinking about, okay, well, if it doesn't have to be that way, what do I want to have it be like? And that was an interesting idea because, again, if you talk to many people out there in the world, they're all like, why do anything differently? Everything's going so swimmingly. And then I think the second trigger for me was a conversation, which I may have told some of you about, conversation with my son, who at that point was pretty young, and he was a bird nerd. He loved anything and everything to do with birds. And my husband was the stay-at-home dad, and his thing was gardening. And I would leave every day and go to work. And so one day, just out of curiosity, I asked Dave, I said, so, you're an expert at birds and dad's an expert at gardens. What do you think I'm an expert in? And he, without missing a beat, said, you're an expert at love, Mom. And I just thought that was the most wonderful compliment I'd ever gotten, and certainly made me feel like I needed to live up to that expectation or whatever. So then we really got started on building what I was calling a stakeholder business, with the idea of it is about community. And the only way we can, should, will succeed in business is if that community, and by that I mean the employees, and I mean the clients, and I mean the community in which we thrive. If all that works, then that's what we're in it for, is to support all of those people. And so I heard about Benefit Corps, and decided that was something that sort of made a lot of sense. And we went down that path. But the only problem there was, if you're a benefit corp, that's great. That's sort of stating what your mission is, but there's nothing that really enforces it, and there's nothing that guarantees that it continues on beyond any time the new owners want to change that. It's easy to change. So that got me down the path of, okay, how do we protect it? And so we investigated a bunch of different options. And I think of it sort of like, my son is now 26, doesn't have a significant other at this point, but it would be nice to be able to decide who he's going to marry and then lock that in. I can't actually do that with him, but I can. There was an option of, okay, what are we doing with this company to ensure that it holds on to its purpose and its principles? So obviously the one choice is you sell to the highest bidder, and that is going to lead you in one direction, and probably not in the direction that I wanted to go with the stakeholder business. We looked at ESOPs, we looked at co-ops, and I think we'll go into that a little bit more, but none of those were particularly the right fit. And after exploring a number of the options and getting support from some great people, and figuring out the financial framework to make it work, so that I could retire and have the company move on, that we came up with this idea of the Perpetual Purpose Trust. And with Jenny's help, we're able to take it across the finish line. We had some minor hiccups like COVID and other things that made it difficult, but I think it was a whole long adventure of many years. And it started with what's the philosophy, and then there was a lot of bringing everybody in the company on board with this is what we're about, and then being able to formalize it with a lot of help.
Thank you for sharing that, Kate, on a lot of the inspiration, what led to it, and some of the background context of the why. So I guess it's a good segue to turn it to you, Jenny, talk a little bit about the legal aspect. So obviously this sort of transition has some legal implications. Could you share maybe a little bit about what that legal process kind of looks like for companies that maybe are transitioning or interested in transitioning to a PPT structure? PPT, by the way, Perpetual Purpose Trust.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to say I'm so grateful that I got to work with the Walker Group. You all are just so inspiring. Kate, you're an amazing leader. I so admire you. So yeah, so in my travels as a lawyer, I've always worked with mission-driven businesses, and the question often comes up, what happened? We can do all these great things now, but how do we ensure that that we stay true to the mission over the long term, even after the founders are gone, or maybe the company gets sold? And I've looked at a lot of different options, and the only one that I know of that really can address that is this purpose trust, this perpetual purpose trust. So it is a unique structure in the sense that, as far as I know, it is the only way to ensure mission over the long term. And the legal structure is not that complicated. The complexity comes about in the transaction of how you move the ownership into the perpetual purpose trust. But for the simple part is you're really just transferring some ownership, either 100% of the ownership or even maybe just a tiny piece of ownership, over to a trust that lives perpetually. And the way you do that is you just issue some stock to that trust, and that stock has special voting rights so that the trust can control the company. And there's many, you really have many options in how that control can work. It could be total control, like appoint the entire board, or it could be a partial control, appoint a portion of the board and have veto rights over certain decisions. So you have a document called the trust agreement, and that lays out what are the rights of the trust with respect to the company. And that is also laid out in the company charter. And the important thing about the trust is that it contains certain guardrails that the trust always has to stay true to as an owner of the company, as a controlling owner of the company. So you put that all into the trust agreement. And so it's kind of simple in the sense of just transferring controlling ownership to the trust and then laying out in the agreement what rights the trust has and what guidelines the trust or guardrails the trust has to stay true to over. And it's perpetual, it goes on forever.
Great. So Jenny, we've been seeing, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call today have heard of companies like Patagonia, probably the biggest name, adopting this exact model, probably with its own slight variations, to align their business with their long-term social mission, maybe their environmental goals. So can you explain, why do you think that this structure is gaining traction now among purpose-driven companies?
Yeah, so, for a long time, people didn't really use this in the United States. It was used more in the UK. But for many, generations, people have been asking themselves, how do we ensure the long-term mission is maintained in a company? So many companies, we know of many companies, I'm sure, that were amazing when they first started and then were acquired. I always think of one example is Adwala. I don't know if anyone remembers Adwala juice, but that was the best juice in the world. And the founders were so mission driven. And then it got acquired by Coca-Cola and became terrible and full of weird chemicals, and then just went out of business. And that there's so many stories like that. And so there's always been a desire among mission-driven founders to figure out ways to ensure long-term fidelity to mission. So Patagonia was not the first to do it in the US. The first to do it in the US, I'm pretty sure, was Organically Grown Company in Oregon. But Patagonia found out about it and did it, and it became, people started learning about it. And so now it's really taking off.
Thanks, Jenny. Kind of thinking back to a little bit of the journey of this, Kate, I'd like to kind of go back to ask you, as you know, there were a lot of things you needed to figure out during this journey. It wasn't all apparent. There was a lot of effort that went into it. But could you share maybe some of the challenges that you faced during this transition?
Sure. Where do I begin? I think the thing that was the biggest challenge ultimately in looking back in the whole thing is the lack of precedent, which just makes it a much scarier kind of adventure. And sort of related to that is the dearth of support in terms of knowing other companies who had gone through it, or knowing professionals that could help guide the way and stuff. So it was a lot of self-education and confidence that sometimes I had and sometimes I didn't, that this was the way to go for us. And a lot of dead ends in terms of, oh, maybe maybe an ESOP could work. And then you go down that path a little and you find out that, oh, wait a minute, that can actually work against the things that we wanted to stand for. So I think those were the main things. And I think the other thing that I didn't realize it was as important as I think it is now, but that is being surrounded by employees, people in the company who truly believed in where we were trying to go, because again, this was relatively new territory. And so you're kind of pitching something that people are like, what is she up to? But there was an amount of trust, and there was a lot of great people working at Walker, and so they were on board with that. And as it became more real, I think people became more on board.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit too. I mean, in the early stages of planning, there was a lot of anxieties. I mean, as a leader in the company, as an employee in the company, I remember all of us saying, how are we going to run a company without an owner? What if we need to go get a new line of credit? Who's going to personally guarantee? All of these things were coming up for us. And we realized that as we started to speak to our partners, our financial partners, people out in the community, I'm not going to lie, Kate, there was a lot of head scratching, like, this lady's going to do what? Like, she's going to what? Why don't all owners just like grow their company and sell it and then say, have a nice day and walk away? I was like, not Kate, that's not what's going to happen. So it was a lot of time. And again, throw a pandemic in there as well. But it was a lot of time that Todd and I and our CFO, Nick, that we all spent really building excitement and rapport around this model, and getting our financial partners, our employees, our clients to trust that this is something that was really important, that we knew there was a lot of unanswered questions, but that we were prepared to do it, telling them the story, telling them the why. And all those head scratches started to turn into, again, more curiosity. And wow, this is something really new and different, and I've never heard of this before. So, but, even leading up to it, it was, we had to have a lot of transparency, within the employee base alone. We had to constantly be reiterating to them, this is not anything to worry about. Like, nothing is going to really change for you. If anything, it's going to create more stability. We've heard from our employees, one of the things that they love about this is that, there is more stability. They're not going to walk in and say, oh, guess what? We've been sold. That can't happen. And really, that all of this does is it locks in that our mission is locked in forever. We can do whatever we want on the services side. We can choose to change that, but we can never change really who we are as far as our DNA goes. So yeah, there was a little bit of there were some challenges there of getting people on board, across our whole ecosystem, but we got there, and continues to be something that is a fun conversation to have.
And I think more and more companies are getting it. I feel like that it's come into its own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jenny, I'm going to turn this back to you. So if I'm a business owner and I'm considering, some type of unique transition like this, what are some of the legal and financial implications that I need to be aware of if I'm considering a move like this?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is just thinking about, if you're doing this, but not all owners do this as an exit. Sometimes an owner might be staying as an owner and just maybe adding the Perpetual Purpose Trust as an additional owner. But a lot of times owners are doing this as a way to exit from at least some or, maybe all of their ownership interest. And so they need to be compensated for that. I mean, they've worked so hard to build the company up. And the company has some value. And we need to, have them compensated for turning over some or all of their ownership interest to the trust. They're giving up something of value. So that's where things can get very complicated, because you have to figure out a way for the owner to get compensated for that. So in some cases, this can be done through a promissory note paid by the company over time. So the note is maybe payable to the owner. So the owner is getting paid over time for giving up their ownership interest. I've had some clients where another party comes in to finance the transition, which can add a lot of complexity because they have their own requirements. So I think that part is probably the part that creates a lot of complexity. Just how is it all going to work? And then there's a lot of tax implications. So and I'm not a tax expert. Luckily, we were able to bring in a really great tax expert. But anytime you're moving valuable assets around from one entity to another, there's the potential that there could be a gift tax, or, is the exchange of value equal? So you really need to hire a good tax person who can advise you on that. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of tax experts that really understand this stuff. So that's one thing. Another thing is ongoing operation of a trust. So you have to have a trustee who's kind of the administrator of the trust. And the trustee, there's many different options for who your trustee can be, but most people will use like a professional corporate trustee. And those trustees charge fees. And there's a basic fee just for being your trustee. And then if there are lots of transactions happening in and out of the trust, that's going to add a lot to your fees. And that's also going to create taxable events. So you have to be thoughtful about how you set things up to minimize that. So a lot of times what we do is we set up a trust in such a way where there's not a lot of money flowing in and out of the trust. But then you have to figure out, well, how is the trust going to cover its own expenses? Are you going to have the company pay for that? Sometimes that can create a challenge, because what if there became I know this wouldn't happen with Walker. I don't think it would, but in some cases there could be maybe a conflictual relationship between the company and the trust, because maybe like some of the board members in the company are looking to sell to the highest bidder, and the trust is like, no, we don't want to sell to that person because that buyer is not, will not maintain our mission. And so you could have a situation, if the company is responsible for covering the trust costs, what if the company says, sorry, we're not covering those costs anymore? Then the trust becomes toothless. So there's lots and lots of considerations. There's a lot of thought. We spent so much time talking through different scenarios, and I do that with all my clients who are doing this. And of course, you're planning ahead for something that could happen 100 years from now or more. So you have to really think through, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? So it's tricky, but it's a fun, creative process too.
Well, and it's so customizable, which was nice. There's a lot of flexibility. There's a basic structure, and then, you add in your flavor of the different things that you want to do and how you want to preserve. Right.
And I do think it's worth saying that there's this is a perpetual purpose trust. I think there's also perpetual employee trusts. So if your mission is more about, I want to protect the company and its employees, I'm not necessarily interested in the community aspect, there's a way of doing that as well, correct, Jenny?
Yeah, it's a very similar model. They're often called employee ownership trusts, and they're more designed to benefit the employees.
Yeah.
Awesome. So kind of more about the structure. Kate, can you maybe share a little bit about like how does this structure really achieve the long-term sustainability of the company's mission and purpose?
Sure. Well, the way it stands right now is that when there are distributed profits and the board basically figures out what profits should be distributed, and then that is approved by the trust stewardship committee to say, yep, that makes sense. So the company doesn't have to distribute all its profits. It may be saving for for a rainy day or some big thing. But they determine what is the distributable profits. And then a third of that goes to the employees in the terms of stakeholder shares. And I don't know if you want me to go into the stakeholder program right now, but anyway, that's a way of having additional shares go to the bigger contributors to the company, and that has a lot of different methods of measuring. And then a third goes to the community, and that third is determined by employees, again, through their stakeholder votes in terms of what nonprofits in the community we want to benefit. So it's loose, but it is, it seems to be working now. And so that's what's locked into the, into that mission right now.
That's what can't be undone, right?
Correct.
We always have to, as long as we are a company that exists, we
Right.
have to have this, we have to be giving back equally. to
Correct.
employees in the
But
community.
I mean, no doubt there will be bad years. There have been in the past, there will be in the future. And if there are no profits to distribute, that's okay. It's not like we have to give out
Right.
a certain amount, irrespective of what's going on financially. So, right. So it's flexible.
Yeah. So this structure, again, ensures that really we continue to live that mission and we're giving back to the community and things of that nature. But what we've also found is that this has also helped us in some competitive advantages with attracting new clients as well. Since we can't be sold, that's a big component, mainly because in our industry, we're just seeing a lot of acquisitions and mergers and things of that nature. And this doesn't prevent us from acquiring, but it does prevent us from being sold. And that kind of, for a lot of our clients, it feels secure to them, right? Because they know our services aren't going to necessarily fluctuate because of the transition, and certainly afterwards. But also, what we found is a lot of the new clients that we've been talking to and prospective clients, they also really like the fact that when they are working with us, that they're really contributing to to the community. Really, they're indirectly supporting the community in our give back efforts, and so I think that's been a really positive thing that we've seen. I would also just quickly add too that as leaders, one of the things that we did along the way, thanks in part with Jess and Kate, was really sharing what was going on with the employees all throughout. And at times internally, I would look at it and say, are we sharing too much, a little too soon? Like, there's so many things that are up in the air, but in hindsight, that was so much the right call, because it wasn't, we got to the day and all of a sudden, surprise everyone, hey, ownership change, and then panic sets in. So I think a lot of that was very positive for our employees, but also, again, for our clients too.
Yeah, and you're right, Todd. It was, I think that was a critical component, was the communication along the way. And we had to be very vulnerable and say, we don't have all the answers yet, but we know what the end game is. We know what it is, and we're going to work through it. And our main goal is to protect our employees, to protect our mission, and to make sure that Kate's taken care of, the company's taken care of. And I think that we all had the same goal in mind, so we were able to make it work. And I'll just say, as never mind as a leader of the organization, but as an employee, and we've heard it from really all of our employees over the last couple of years. Again, I said it before, knowing that you're never going to come into work and be told, hey, guess what? We've just been sold and now we're going to be cleaning house. That can't happen. So that's a nice security for our employees. But really, it's more about being part of something bigger. everybody comes to work every day. You work really hard, and I mean, I think most companies, I really, really want to believe that most companies now care deeply for their employees and they feel a part of something. But at the end of the day, in a traditional business, which there's nothing wrong with this, the owner works hard and the benefit of the company is for them, eventually for them. In our model, it's different. I always say, Todd and I feel like we have the best jobs in the world because our job is to take really, really good care of our employees. Number one, top priority. And then they will take really good care of our clients. We know that. And then we have to do well, like no money, no mission. We have to have a high performing company. That is our goal. But when those things happen, then we just get to give it away. I mean, really, we get to give it to the community. We get to share it with our employees. So the employees feel part of something so good. And yes, of course, if you're an employee here and you get the benefit of profit distribution, that's wonderful. Nobody's going to not like that. However, what feels even better sometimes is being able to be asked, where do you want our community dollars to go? What organizations are important to you? What causes are important to you? And then you have a specific number of shares that you vote the dollars in your name towards that cause. And then at the end, we get to see all of these amazing organizations that we've supported and how our operations as a successful IT and digital marketing company have this trickle effect out to the community. And then we get to see the recipients of our community dollars come to us with such gratitude and see how they're able to further their mission. And it's just an amazing feeling as an employee. And time again, that's what we hear from our employees. And I really do think it has a huge impact on the culture here and the feeling of why we come to work every day, and also retention. We've had the best employee retention over the last couple of years than in probably the history of the company. I don't want to say it. I've said it a couple of times before, but I'm going to say it again. We've had 0% employee attrition in 29 months now. We're going on 29 months. I mean, that's a little unheard of in our industry. And I don't want to say it's 100% because of our model, but I would say probably 80%. People are excited about it. They're proud of it. And again, because we put employees at the forefront of what we do, they feel that. So yeah, I mean, it's good. It's good for the business long term, and it's good for our employees, and of course the community.
And it's interesting from my perspective, again, in the wanting to have control, but being wise enough to know you can't have ultimate control. I remember when we were thinking about, okay, what are the community things we should give back to? And I have my priorities. And so it's a little tempting to say, okay, so we'll do voting, but it has to be in these areas. So what we did is to say, okay, here are the areas. There's three major areas that were my top priorities. Those are going to be the overarching things for the next 5 years or whatever it was. And then we will reevaluate what those should be, but people can vote within those categories and then outside. But that over time, those overarching criteria can change, and that's going to reflect what
become part of what the people at the time
exactly
care about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So Jenny, I just wanted to circle back to you. We mentioned ESOP before. There's a lot of different alternative models for ownership: ESOP, co-op, nonprofit. Can you explain a little bit why the PPT is different and the difference between some of those?
Yeah. So an ESOP, as Kate said earlier, it actually can backfire because it is governed by retirement law, ERISA, and the trustee. So an ESOP is something where there's stock owned for in the interest of the financial benefit for the employees. And the trustee is required to maximize shareholder return. So sometimes there can actually be a conflict between what the ESOP is required to do. And of course, there's lots of debate about what is really the ESOP trustee's fiduciary duty, but you don't even want to get into that. So there can be a conflict between what the trustee thinks is best for its beneficiaries, who are the employees, and the desire to maximize their financial return versus the mission of the company. Plus, ESOPs are very expensive to run and manage. And really, I mean, there's nothing about an ESOP that ensures long-term fidelity to mission, because all an ESOP is, potentially going to have some voting rights, but with no necessary guardrails. Really, the guardrails are more that fiduciary obligation to maximize the returns to the beneficiaries of the trust. A co-op is a great tool, but it's very democratic, and there's really nothing to prevent the company, again, from losing its mission. There's lots of examples of co-ops that have sold out because the members of the co-op, maybe they really love the idea of being a democratically run co-op, but then suddenly their company started to become more and more valuable, and they said, you know what? We're going to just cash out and sell the company. So there's really nothing to prevent a co-op from doing that. And that isn't super uncommon in the world of co-ops. And then with nonprofits, I'm sure many of you have heard of nonprofits that have been founded by maybe one or a small group of people with a certain mission in mind. But a nonprofit has to be run by a board, and the board is usually chosen by the board. So it's a self-perpetuating board, and the board can easily, lose touch with the original mission and can go off in a different direction. I've been a lawyer for co-ops for nonprofits that have fired their founders and removed them from the board. So really, a PPT is the only way to ensure long-term fidelity to certain principles. I mean, all of those models have have some pros, have benefits and, costs, but they're all, they're not up to the task that a PPT is up to.
Yeah, and I know you've alluded to this a couple of times, but really, like clearly stated, like, how does this model really ensure that the mission of the company remains central even after leadership changes? So Kate world, post Todd and Jess world, like how do we know? How does Kate know that this is going to remain central in generations to come?
Yeah, and I'll admit, even a PPT, it has its pitfalls. So in the trust agreement, you put certain principles that so there's a group of people called the Trust Stewardship Committee that make the decisions for the trust, and they are supposed to follow the principles that are laid out and the guardrails that are laid out in the trust agreement. But of course, those are somewhat vague, so they are somewhat subject to interpretation. There's also a role called the trust enforcer, because there's no beneficiary in a perpetual purpose trust. A trust enforcer is there to address any issues where it looks like the trust is maybe no longer staying true to those guardrails that are in the trust agreement. But another really important tool is amending the charter of the company. And the company, I've had clients that are corporations, LLCs. The company can be really any kind of company. It can even be potentially maybe a nonprofit, I think. It probably could, yeah, because it could be a member. So it can be any kind of company, but there's a charter document for that company, like the certificate of incorporation or the operating agreement for an LLC. And that's where we put in a lot of details about, for example, this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, that went into the charter of the company. And then you give the trust the authority to veto any amendments to the charter. The charter is really what has the teeth when it comes to the way the company has to behave. And really, you could put almost anything into a charter. In fact, Delaware just passed a law to add more rights for shareholders to take on the role of management. So, the charter, I'd say, is really where you can put some teeth into making sure that the trust has control, because you put everything you want into the charter, and then the trust can veto any changes to the charter.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. So Kate, kind of thinking about business owners today that might be interested in, considering this type of transition versus some of the others. Is there any advice that you might give to someone that's kind of interested in learning more, or, places to start looking, anything like that?
I would say, get in touch with me. I'd love to be your support that I didn't have just from a non-technical perspective, but from a, yeah, you can do it. I'll be your mother, like my mother was to me. So I'd say that's really important, is to get some support around you, and to really be vocal about what your intentions are and what your mission is. Like Jess was saying, it's ultimately a benefit if you are upfront and telling people about it, even if you're not sure on the particulars, because then it's not a big surprise. Those would be my main things.
Great. So I think we can move into Q&A. And I'm going to launch it off, if that's okay, because I'm going to ask, I think we have like a question or two. And again, for all of our attendees, if you have questions or you need clarification, I know a lot of the talk is fairly technical in nature on the legal side and the structure side. So if you want clarification, please just pop it into the Q&A. But, you know, the big question, and Jenny talked about this under the financial implications, but the big question that people usually ask is, okay, so like in Patagonia's case, the owner of Patagonia, who's a multi-billionaire, I think, you know, he just said, well, I don't really need the money. I'm just going to give my shares, you know, into this trust. So did you give your shares?
Absolutely.
Did you just give the company away?
Moved on to the sidewalk.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously you worked very hard for
Yeah.
30 plus years, and so maybe you could just sort of explain at a high level, sort of how the financial transaction went.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, a lot like Jenny was saying, that what we did was set up a note. So I didn't give, I sold the company to the trust, which then, and we set it up in such a way so that basically, you know, my income wasn't going to decrease for the next 30 years, which I'm assuming will carry me all the way out. And then once the note is paid off, then that's the end of that. So it's not, I mean, as Jenny said, you can set it up however you need. My intention was not to harm me in, you know, I could have just kept on doing what I was doing, probably not for 30 years, but it kept me whole while making this whole thing possible. So that was the setup.
Yeah, and the way that I always try to break it down for people is just to sort of say, you know, it's, you know, while the Walker Group, the note is between you and the trust, but the Walker Group pays dividends to our owner, who's the trust, and they use those dividends to pay off the note. And again, as leaders in the company, we had to make sure too that it made sense for us, and there were provisions. God forbid there's a downturn in business, you know, and Kate was, of course, very mindful of knowing that the health of the Walker Group is of the utmost importance to this whole transaction for you for the long term too. So we came to an agreement with just a lot of open communication that really made a lot of sense for everybody. And you know, it's just in essence a payout over time, exactly. You know, which makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So just wanted to point that out, since I know that's usually the first question we have.
As a follow-up to that question, we did have someone asking whether we are working with a golden share in this case, as far as the structure.
Interesting. So when you go back to the early days, and we set up a benefit corp, I was searching around for what's the way to accomplish what we're trying to do, and we created a golden share that was initially going to be, it was given to a nonprofit that I had started to promote social enterprise, and the idea was they could hold that golden share and make sure that we stayed in that lane. Ultimately, that turned out not to be the right thing, so they gave that golden share back, and now that's worked into the ownership structure, but that's not the thing that's keeping us a PPT. if that makes sense.
There's also a second golden share owned by the trust, which is what allows the dividends to get paid to the trust. So there's actually two golden shares in this structure. And I think when I never really use the term golden share, but I think what it means is, you know, shares that provide extra benefits. The share that that Kate owns, the golden share, in the sense that it provides certain extra benefits, it doesn't have any voting rights, if I remember correctly. Whereas the one that the trust has does have very extremely powerful voting rights. So it's just different classes of shares.
And again, I think that's all sort of malleable depending on what it is, the situation that you're in and what you're trying to accomplish as the founder.
Okay, we did have a more involved question, but I thought I would just ask for one more summary of the aspects of the structure of our arrangement as a PPT, as far as what are non-negotiables, right? So there's in terms of the business non-negotiables, just for clarification, and maybe I don't know if who wants to take it, but just so everyone's clear on maybe even a distinction between what are in this model, the business non-negotiables. And obviously we've talked a lot about our commitment to mission and the Walker Group's commitments to the community and the culture and that we've created here. But if we can just kind of clarify what the non-negotiables are in terms of the length of this, even as far as we did have a question about whether it can be sold. So us being in existence, that type
Let
of
me
thing.
take a high view and Jennifer can dive in and clarify for me. My feeling is the only two non-negotiables are that at least 30% of distributed profits go to community and at least 30% of distributed profits go to employees. That's that cannot be undone. So no, we can't be sold. Well, could we be sold to another? I don't think so. To another PPT, I guess. I don't know.
I think the company could be sold, but it would have to be subject to the approval of the trust. I don't remember all the details because I've worked on a few others since we worked together. But yeah, I don't think there's anything prohibiting the sale, but I think, you know, it would be subject to approval by the trust.
I think in the trust agreement, there's about 7 or 8 bullets that sort of outline what, and I think maybe Diana, that would answer like the non-negotiable or the sort of things that have to sort of stay in line, you know?
Right.
Again, there's nothing in those 8 or 9 bullets that say we have to provide IT services.
Right.
There's nothing that says we have to have a brick and mortar building. There's nothing in there but it does say we have to have a structure for employee participative governance. It does say we have to, you know, share profit. We have to have a program to share profits with the employees in the community. It does say we have to have a very high level of integrity and transparency. So there's a lot of things like that really are very high level, like what I would call DNA of the company type of commitments. And outside of that, you know, with the proper agreements from the trust and the trust stewardship committee and the board, you know, some things can alter a little bit. But I think that the thing about this structure, whether, you know, is that there's several levels of control in place, and the trust enforcer and the trust stewardship committee are there to protect us from going away from the mission. Mm-hmm. Like the business structure and all of those things can change a little bit, but as long as the trust agreement and the mission is intact, then, you know, other things can be changed, just not very easily. Right. So did we want to go back to that other question, Diana?
We had a follow-up on the golden share question, so let me just jump back to that. This is the way that I understand a golden share, which would be held by a separate foundation or trust that would have a veto right if the trustees want to sell. Does that make sense?
I think it's seeking clarification on what you were saying earlier, Jenny, about those golden shares, and does it need to be a separate entity for that?
So the way a trust works, the Perpetual Purpose Trust works is it's going to own some equity in the company, and you're going to put certain rights on that equity. And usually that involves certain voting rights, which could be to appoint board members, could be to veto certain decisions. So yeah, I don't use the term golden share because it's not super specific. I don't know exactly what people mean when they say it. So it's really just a special class of stock that has certain rights associated with it. And that's all laid out in the charter. A lot of people think that that the most important thing is the trust agreement, that governs the trust itself. But honestly, it's really the charter of the company that is probably even more important, because it's what gives the rights to the trust to control the company.
Okay, we did have a more in-depth question about the relationship between the governing bodies. So the board of directors, the trust stewardship committee, the trustee, trust enforcer, and in what scenario, if there is any kind of alignment or mission confusion or plausible scenarios where those entities might be at odds. Where is the ultimate hierarchy there, and where does the buck stop, if you will, if there's any kind of misalignment or conflict?
Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, that can vary depending on the particular structure. You don't have to give the trust total power over the company. You can give it partial power. As I said, there's also the power of the purse. I alluded to that before, where the trust needs money to survive because it has to pay the trustee, it has to pay an accountant to do its taxes. So there's some minimum costs associated with running a trust. So if the trust is depending on the company to cover its costs, that could create an issue. But if the trust has total control over the company by being able to appoint the board, that's generally not going to be a problem. That would be more of a problem if the trust maybe only has a right to appoint like a minority of the board members.
We had another question about whether all employees are automatically eligible to participate. So if we can do a little bit of clarification there on the PPT model and also the stakeholder program.
Sure. Yeah, so the stakeholder program that we have at Walker, it's not a requirement of being a PPT, but it's something we've had in place for 15 years or more probably. So it actually worked out really well because it aligns nicely with the model. But the way that that we have structured our particular stakeholder program is day one, an employee joins the company. They are not what's considered an employee stakeholder, so they don't get these shares, and the shares are used for voting rights and calculating profit distribution primarily. So day one, no, but it is meant to be a very inclusive program. So the first level of getting into the stakeholder program typically comes at 1 year of employment. Again, we want every employee, as long as they meet certain criteria, and really the criteria to get into the program is that you're here, you're an employee, you're performing well, and that you're contributing to the company. And again, in theory, every single employee should be adhering to that. So we want them in at the base level, which we call our associate level stakeholder. And then from there, the criteria for the next couple of levels up is time. Once you're here 3 years, you can be considered for the next level, but it's really contribution to the company. And it's not only based on job performance alone. That's a core underlying understanding, but it's really contributing to the company above and beyond your job, whether it's culturally, whether it's taking a leadership stance, even if it's not part of your role. We want people who are contributing to the company, to making the company a better place in a very out of the box way. It might not be on your job description, but if you see something that needs to be improved, we want you to speak up. We want you to be part of the solution. And again, we always say, I've said it before, we don't really have a traditional owner. You're the owner. What do you think needs to be done? And that's how we want people thinking. Our employee stakeholders think, this is my company. How can I contribute to it? So to answer your question, everybody's eligible, but after a year is typically when they're eligible to join the program. And most people just continue to grow up within the program. And the share value, their share values, even if you sort of capped out at the highest level of stakeholder, your share value grows with merit shares through performance reviews every year.
And just to
And
add,
just to clarify, that's not actual equity, right? It's like
No. The shares are
It's
for voting rights. in
bonus,
certain
like a
equity
bonus,
matters, and then again, it's used to calculate profit distribution per employee.
yeah.
I just wanted to add that there are 3 levels of the stakeholder program for us. And I think one of the things that the program does, and I don't know that it was necessarily maybe intentional, as it certainly wasn't the sole purpose, but I think what it does for our employees is it helps them align to understanding, like, again, having that mindset of this is your company and focusing on, like, what can I do outside of my normal day-to-day functions? How can I improve things? And it's really solution minded. And we do have people all over, the company all the time. They're always finding areas where, hey, this is an area of weakness, or this is something we should maybe be considering. So it really brings kind of a community sense internally as employees. And I think it does a really good job of that.
And there's other benefits too to being a stakeholder. We have regular meetings where you get a little deeper insight into company financials, into, again, decision making. There's a lot of things that we put out to employee vote, which is not common in a lot of companies. So the employee, and once we're all sitting here in a room as employee stakeholders, there's kind of no titles anymore. It doesn't matter if you're a manager, a leader, a director, or just, somebody who's been with us a year. You have the same ability to hear the conversations, you have voting rights in decisions, and you're eligible for the profit distribution at some level. Sorry, Diana, go ahead.
No, just switching gears really quickly. We did have a question about whether we engaged a valuation advisor to arrive at the selling price of the company before transitioning into the PPT.
I didn't get the question.
Oh, can you repeat that, Diana? Sorry.
Sure. It was a question about whether we engaged a valuation advisor in terms of determining the selling price of the company before transitioning into the PPT structure.
We did one valuation a few years before that. But then ultimately what I realized is my goals were, again, to if I am making X after the exit, I want to continue to have that annual income, and I wanted to do it in a way that was a low interest loan to the Walker Group. So that, we had to sort of back into it, but then that created the price. And so that was the price. And so we didn't need the valuation to say, well, here's what it's really worth, higher or lower. That didn't kind of matter. So that's what we did.
Supplemental, really.
I have to jump off the call. I'm so sorry.
So we are going to wrap.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. I just wanted to let everybody know we are going to be sending a follow-up email today. Thank you all for attending. If you have any questions that you feel you would still like to pose, please add that in our survey. And if there's anybody that you'd like to make a connection with for further conversation, we're happy to play matchmaker, whether that's any of our co-CEOs today, or Kate or Jenny. And again, thank you for your interest and for coming and spending your lunch hour with us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.